and ask me questions. I think maybe because we have a small group, maybe I could ask you to maybe just introduce yourselves and let me know what it is you do, because of what I can do is just sort of tweak the presentation to suit you and what you need. Mayela, you're very welcome to unmute if you can. Sometimes people don't have microphones, especially at work. Would anybody else like to introduce themselves? Auxilia, are you able to say how's it?
Hi, afternoon. I'm still trying to find the correct screen. I've been struggling to join the session, so yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Can you tell me just what role you have and what you're hoping to learn today?
Okay, I'm coming in from a space of, I've done a lot of data work in terms of data analysis, and I'm trying to move more into the data management space and specialize on that. So I'm just hoping by the end of this session, I will gain some insight into the, what's it, personal?
The POPPI.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, call it what you want.
I'm just jumping from one session to another, so yeah, I just need to make sure that I mention the correct topic. You know, I'm here for the correct topic.
Yeah, it's this one now. Okay, good.
All right.
You're having a learning day. That's fun. Kennedy, would you like to say hi?
Hi there, Ryan. Ryan Kennedy.
Ryan, sorry, I just saw the first name Kennedy. Sorry.
Kennedy is my surname. Yeah, just I'm a data architect. So obviously PI is very important, data security, and these days, the accountability lies with us if we approve things that can lead to a data breach and that kind of stuff. So yeah, interested in the subject.
Cool. Well, hopefully I'll be able to scope this bit for you today. Mayela?
Yes, I'm here. Yes. Yes, my main expertise has been for oil and gas industry over, I don't know how many years. At the moment, I'm here taking care of my mom. She's 90, okay. And but I'm looking for some job online, okay, because this is the only way I can do it. Yes, I was working for industry in data management, business analyst, data governance, data modeling, etc. Many areas in data management. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Tesha Lasani?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tesha. I'm the head of ICT development. So my interest in this is just to have more knowledge around your privacy concerns, your security, around your personal information, and yeah, the data security side of things.
Okay, so you said you're heading up IT's development.
ICT development, yes.
Okay. All right, so you're in the software development and systems design.
Not really. Like my role encompasses all software development, but it mainly focuses on the data management side of it.
Okay, cool. Good to know. Thank you. Jane?
Yeah.
Afternoon, everyone. As a data steward, data privacy is a big part of my work. So me joining this session is just to gain knowledge on the subject matter. Thank you.
Okay, super. Sorry, where did you say you're working? What field?
I'm a data steward at FNB.
I can't hear that, but okay, data steward. That's enough.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks. Well, I think so we've been working through the life of Pi. So what I'll do is I'll start my presentation, and I will show you. No, other way around. It's here. So I'm just going to start my presentation, walk you through it, and then I wanted to sort of maybe give you a little indication, because my goal today is to show you, lift the covers a little bit for you about what goes on in the background when we're managing risk and how we manage risk. I think a lot of people don't really understand what that's all about. I certainly didn't when I started my process of, I've always worked in IT. And when I moved into privacy, I was going, okay, well, what are they talking about when they, when they talk about a privacy impact assessment, or when they talk about a monitoring risk and managing risk? It was always very vague to me, and I never really understood what they meant by that. But I think data professionals, data management professionals, sorry, are especially well placed to understand risk, because I think if you can see where this is going to go, it helps you a lot more when you are doing the design work, when you're designing architecture, or when you are designing systems, or when you're actively managing data. I think it helps to have the risk-based approach, to be aware of that risk-based approach, so that you can either facilitate the relationship or conversation with your compliance management and your risk managers, and also so that you can, contribute to the risk profile. So basically reduce the risk because of the way that you manage things, if that makes sense. Right, I am about ready to share my screen. I just have a couple of things I wanted to show you, so I'm just juggling some windows, so just bear with me for a minute. And most of all, I must keep track of where you are. Okay, here we are. I'm sharing my screen. Let's go. There it is. All right, can you see that intro slide now? So the origin of this talk was The Life of Pi. I don't know if you guys have ever read the book. There's a book called The Life of Pi. If you haven't read it, highly recommend it. It's a brilliant, classic, must-read book. But I particularly love this book. But then when I realized that Pi and PI, overlap, I thought I'd be clever and talk about the data life cycle in context as the life of Pi. So that was the life cycle approach to protecting personal information. And one of the things that one of my missions with Howard and Veronica and the team have been to basically put the data back into data protection, right? Like data protection has gone so far down the road of worrying about penalties and fines and worrying about everything. We haven't really looked at it from a data management point of view. And I think we're missing a trick there. So thank you for attending today, and hopefully today we will be able to I'll be able to show you a couple of things maybe that might help you further on in your career or in conversations you'll be having, and help you out with some stuff. So just a bit about me. I've been around the block for a long time, doing lots of things, and mainly at the moment running Clearwood Consulting. And we focus on information governance and information risk and compliance risk. And that's kind of the topic I'm going to talk to you today. So I'm kind of in my home turf today. It's very nice for me because data management is not a strong point. So, but we're talking about privacy and we're talking about legal obligations, but please note, I'm not a lawyer and Clearwood is not a legal practice. So anything I say to you today is not legal advice. You mustn't pick it up and go, oh, we have to do this, or we mustn't do that. That is for your legal team to tell you. Okay, so everything is always on the idea that your legal team has told you what's important and what's not important. And ideally, that should have been interpreted into your policies, as you'll see soon. And just thank you very much again to Dharma for hosting these meetups. It's been an absolute joy. And yeah, one of the things that we've started doing is Howard is now joining me on Know What Skills. If you want to have more information about this, or you feel like you need to upskill a little bit, or just get a little bit more access, maybe some access to some of the resources I'm providing, we have a coaching platform that we're using to sort of coach people through the competencies that you need for these things, where it's not as hectic as needing a certification, but you kind of need some help or like a little bit more input or just some idea of where to go. So that's what that is for. You can find us on LinkedIn. And yeah, the thing I was talking about earlier is providing skills coaching as a service. So basically coaching you through your journey with privacy is what I would be doing. And obviously Howard and the team look more at the data career side. Right, life cycle approach to data protection, or how to tame that tiger in your boat. So the life cycle, again, just to remind everybody where we are in this these talks, we started at the disposal at the end of the game, and we're now all the way back up here at planning. So we've worked through the whole thing. The recordings are online if you want to go see them. And we are looking at planning for PI today. So we're ready to go. I'm going to give you a quick 101 on POPPI, because I know that sometimes, you know, we don't all talk about POPPI every day. So lucky you don't get to do my job. Just to remind you who the role players are, because accountability is the biggest thing, right, when it comes to privacy. In the middle is your company and their role as a responsible party. Okay, in GDPR, we talk about a controller, but in POPPI, we talk about a responsible party. Same. And a responsible party is the company who decides what information must be collected and why, and what it's for, right? Your data subjects, every company has data subjects. And it's not just companies, by the way, it's schools, organizations, churches, everybody. You collect data, but companies will collect their data at least about their employees, always. So they're definitely the responsible party for the data of their employees, but you're obviously also responsible for the data of your customers and that sort of thing. You then allow that personal data to flow, and we'll talk a little bit about flows today. So you've got the flow of personal information that flows into third parties, right? And your third parties might be, maybe you outsource your HR function, so there's a whole other company that manages your payroll. Or it might be your hosting. So maybe using Microsoft 365, and you're hosting your Outlook and everything in their data centers in Dublin, Ireland. And you know, they are in our processor, or maybe you're backing data up. So just in terms of systems architecture, and even business analysis. When you decide to allow data to be managed somewhere, to flow somewhere, or to be managed by somebody, you're introducing new operators. Okay. And then POPPI defines a role called information officer. This is not the same as a chief information officer, completely different thing. It's actually more like a compliance officer. But in POPPI, it actually says the head of the organization is the information officer, and then someone has to get registered, and you can have deputies. So they are the people who are accountable for making sure that you are compliant. Any questions on that? Just lay of the land, right? Please feel free to interrupt me and ask me questions, okay? One of the perspectives that I've been putting forward in these talks specifically is that when people talk about risk, when people talk about fines and penalties, they always talk about it like it's the boogeyman. But actually the penalties are helping you, data managers, to know what the important things are. Like, what are the things you must really focus on? Okay, especially in POPPI, because we don't have a lot of fines in POPPI, as you'll see in a minute. GDPR and some of the other privacy legislations in the world have a lot of penalties. They attach a lot of penalties, but POPPI doesn't really. Okay, and I'm also going to show you today this concept of riskiest risks. I'm going to show you what that looks like. Okay, let's go. First thing is, when you're talking about managing privacy and implementing privacy or handling privacy, what we're talking about actually is compliance risk. Okay, so what risk are we introducing? And what POPPI says is, listen, in your company, you currently manage risk, all right? Cybersecurity risk, third-party risk, contractual risk, regulatory risk, staff behaviors, right? And we manage all sorts of operational risk. We have, most companies have got some sort of risk management function. They follow a risk management methodology. And there is an association, much like DARMA, where you can go to the the Risk Management Association of South Africa, and they have a methodology and a DMBOK, similar to the DMBOK, and they have a way of working. Now, what POPPI says you've got to do is it doesn't tell you how to manage risk, but what it does say is you've got to think about privacy risk on top of all your normal stuff. So what you've got to do is you've got to check to see what are your positive obligations, what are the things that you have got to do by law, that if you didn't do those things, you'll be in trouble, right? So those are like the foundational things that you've just got to do. And an example of that, for example, would be a privacy impact assessment. Now, that's something that data managers really need to know about. And it's one of the things that POPPI says has got to be done. Then there's this unlawful processing of personal information is the other risk. Well, this is basically when I'm an individual, I go to a gym, I have my gym membership, and they track my BMI, and then I leave the gym. I no longer have a contract with them or whatever, but they're still holding on to all of my personal information, including my BMI, which is essentially health information. And they know where I live, and they know what my bank details are, and they know everything, right? And part of that is that, well, I don't have a contract with them anymore. I'm no longer their data subject. So why are they still processing that data? So they might say to me, well, your payment information is legal and there's VAT attached, so we have to keep that for 5 years because of laws and regulations. And I'll say, okay. They said, but do you need my BMI? Is there any law that says you must keep my BMI? And they're like, no. So, okay, then you have to delete that. You don't have a reason to process that anymore. Does that make sense? Stop me if this is going too fast for you. Okay, because I'm aware that this isn't your normal day-to-day, so just stop me if anything is unclear. So you have governance, risk, and compliance function in your organization. It's even if you're in a small company, somebody's doing it, right? And they might not call it GRC, but they're doing it because somebody's worrying about whether VAT gets paid on time, and somebody is worrying about whether or not POPIA is implemented properly. And somewhere in your organization, somebody's talking about strategic risk, operational risk, financial risk, and reputational risk. Those are sort of the typical kind of risk categories. So the word category is already going to perk up your ears. So there's categories of risk that you have to worry about in the risk management methodologies, right? Now, one of the things that happens is when we talk about privacy and security, we are actually augmenting. We carry risk in cybersecurity of say ransomware, right, or a data breach, a compliance risk, maybe a personal information data breach. Those risks have to integrate, like, so they could present different types of risk to your organization. So, for example, if personal information, IP, if intellectual property information gets leaked, and that theft leads to bad press, you could suffer real strategic risk. So that's this actually happened to Samsung. One of their developers was using ChatGPT to check their code, and the code was actually a top secret development of a new product. And of course, they got into open market because it's ChatGPT. So yeah, that was one of the early breaches in AI. Operational risk. So with ransomware attacks, yes, your data could end up on the web. Like we saw now, there's been a new enforcement notice just issued recently, where data did end up on the dark web. And that is one of the risks, right, is when people suffer a ransomware attack. But there's also downtime and loss of revenue, which is also an operational risk. Obviously, there's financial, where you might end up with a big fine and bad press, like has happened to this company now, and reputational risk, right? So you might start losing customers or find it difficult to get customers because of the impact of a cybersecurity breach or a privacy non-compliance. Sorry, I stand corrected. The ransomware attack is a separate thing. The enforcement notice that went out was because a company wasn't adhering to a data subject's request to be removed from their mailing list. So that has resulted in a huge, like a big thing. It's on the internet now. And, so basically, somebody was sending out direct marketing mailers. The person asked to be, kept saying, I want to unsubscribe, and just kept getting the newsletters. Now in POPPI, that's a problem because that is unlawful processing of information. If I have not consented, then you can't do that, okay, for direct marketing. And now, because it's in the news, we're leading to reputational damage because now we all know that this company's done this, and now everyone's going to be going, okay, well, you know, that's a bit of a risky company. So your compliance framework is something that you need to be aware of. If you don't know what it is, go ask, find out what your compliance framework is. You do have to have one. And, well, you do have one. There'll be some management of compliance. There's a thing called compliance risk monitoring. So when we talk about POPPI risk, we talk about compliance risk, okay? And in there, of course, you've got your POPPI obligations. Something that you guys really need to keep note of is that there's a thing called codes of conduct, and that can change your obligations. So, for example, with direct marketing, if your marketing company, your marketing department is a member of the South African Direct Marketing Association, that the DMSA have actually had a code of conduct registered with the regulator. So that means the rules for your company have changed with regard to POPPI and direct marketing, because that code of conduct is almost like a law now. So it's good to know that like these things are actually regulated. So for example, the credit bureaus are all members of the Credit Bureau Association, I think. Anyway, they have a code of conduct as well. Okay. And binding corporate rules, if you're working in a giant organization that's like a global thing, you know, we're talking in like a Unilever or something, they very often have binding corporate rules. And what that means is that it's policies, internal policies, but they're actually reviewed by the regulator and they're actually passed into law. So it's actually quite a big deal. So when you're designing a system or looking at your data, don't just think just POPPI. You need to understand what your full compliance obligation is. Okay, and this might extend to things like contracts. You know, you might have to comply with certain contracts, or maybe if you're in the health industry, there's legislations that you have to comply with that will impact on privacy. So these things all come together, and it's good to know how these things overlap and how they impact on each other, so that when you see that a new code of conduct has come into law, you'll know whether or not that impacts on you. Okay, so those are the key words you can listen for. Compliance risk management, you have a compliance framework, you have a compliance risk register, and you have a compliance risk monitoring plan. So I'm going to show you those three today so you get an idea in your head of what they look like. Okay. And the idea is literally that we know what we have to comply with. We keep a register of what those risks are, and the register includes the risk rating. And then we have a risk monitoring plan where we say, well, given that risk rating and given the mitigations that we've implemented, have we addressed that risk, right? So is it getting better or worse, right? And whenever you introduce a big change, whenever there's a system change or a data design change or an architecture change, or you introduce a new third party, or you introduce maybe mergers and acquisitions, any kind of big changes, your compliance risk is impacted, and you have to go back to this compliance risk register and readdress your risk monitoring plan. So if you're in moving into more senior roles in data management and moving into data governance, this is definitely stuff you need to know about. Okay. How does it work? Well, we've got our obligations. So just to summarize where we were, you've got your obligations, right? We call it your compliance universe. We use those obligations, we look at them and we see what are the penalties and fines, what's the risk of reputational impact, what's the risk of financial impact, what's the sensitivity of the data we're managing, is there any risk to the individual data subjects? And to do that, we manage that in our risk management methodology, whichever way you're doing this, right? So you have a whole bunch of risk registers and you manage it in there. Your cybersecurity risk should be in a risk register. And because of that risk analysis, what we do is we decide to come up with a compliance framework. So this is basically saying, what's our framework? How are we going to address this? Are we going to leverage a one trust system? Are we going to, what's the methodology we're going to apply? Are we going to use ISO 27001 to help us to be compliant? So that's your framework. Like, what are the different policies, process, procedures that fall out of that? So if I implement ISO 27001, I need to know whether I need to tell people what to do. So I need new policies and processes and procedures in place to make sure we are complying with ISO 27001. All right. So that's where ISO 27000 fits in. This is where DAMA D and BOK fits in. These are the frameworks that you have your compliance framework. How are we going to comply? And you adopt it, you adapt other frameworks, best practices, and you distill out of that your policies, processes, and procedures. So, for example, your obligations for privacy, which might include codes of conduct, which might include client and corporate rules, they should really be summarized into your internal policy of how you do data protection. So you should have some sort of internal policy on data protection. And that policy should tell you as a data management what it is that your organization needs to do with personal information, what things you're not allowed to do with personal information. And it should also give you some idea of where the risk lies. Does that make sense? So that's why we have policies, because we're addressing risk. And we're also implementing our frameworks, our best practice frameworks. When we do the work, when people do processes, so for example, one of the procedures that you need to have implemented for POPPI is a personal information impact assessment, or a privacy impact assessment. I call it a PIA. So the personal information impact assessment is a type of procedure, right? And it forms part of any kind of change management process. So we assess the impact of change. We also assess the impact on our privacy obligations, and we assess the impact on the data subject. That is a privacy impact assessment. So there would be records and evidence produced of that, which would be a PIA report. So the report is evidence that a PIA was conducted. If the regulator comes to you and says to you, we're launching an investigation of your company, they're going to want to see that PIA report to demonstrate, to provide evidence that you have complied with that positive obligation in POPPI. Okay, so that's how that comes together. So when the regulator comes in your door, they're going to say to you, well, these are your obligations. Show us the evidence that you've complied with those obligations. And the risk management fits right in the middle. Okay, because what is PIA? PIA is just a risk management methodology. Right. And why do you need to know that? Because whenever you're designing a new system, going through a new software development, especially for business analysts should be doing privacy impact assessments as their day-to-day normal thing, because you're literally designing how things are going to work. So privacy impact assessments are very important for you to be doing. So any questions on that? Any stuff? Let's see. Hi, Niels. Has anybody got, so if I stun you into silence, are you dying of boredom? You wish I would stop talking? Any hands, questions so far? Are we doing okay? Veronica, I'm still coming through okay? Cool. All right, well, let's carry on.
All good, thank you,
all right, cool.
Caroline. We're all just absorbing here.
Okay, and it's a lot of information, I apologize.
It sure is, but it's necessary.
So here it is again in another format. So you have business policies and business processes, all right? Those business processes result in data flows, right? So because I need to process payroll and I outsourced my HR function, my payroll information is going to flow from my employee through my organization, through my HR manager, and to my outsourced payroll service provider. And then they will flow that data into their software, which might be a cloud-based system hosted in the Netherlands. Okay, so those are your personal information data flows. We need to know whether those are risky or not. So what do? We conduct a privacy impact assessment, which results in a PIA report. That privacy impact assessment informs our risk registers. Now, I call it an information risk register because that is what King 4 asks for. It's like kind of like combination of all these different risk registers from an IT point of view. So you've got information risk register that kind of lets you know how risky is this. Is this a red, orange, or green? Okay, have we mitigated the risk? Is it a massive risk? Are we facing penalties? Like what's the risk? So you evaluate the risk here. You come up with your PIA report, and your business process and POPIA report inform the thing. Maybe you've heard of this. I haven't spoken about it today. It's called a ROPA, or a Register of Processing Activity. It's like a little database of all your business processes. Now, GDPR says you've got to have one. POPIA doesn't say you have to do one, but honestly, it's helpful to have it. But honestly, I don't know why. Like, it's good to have a ROPA because you need to know what your obligations are in terms of privacy. But this is actually your business process register. This is like, if you have a whole bunch of SOPs or a whole bunch of process documentation, or you just know that, like, you know, and I'm sure the business analysts in the room will understand what I mean. Like, if you've got to go and discover how a department works, right? And you come up with a whole bunch of design around how things need to work in our new system. And now you get your data architecture and you build a data architecture. You're influencing the way that the data flows. You're influencing the way the system works. So your business that leverages that, like HR payroll, there needs to be an HR payroll entry in here. And what the ROPA is aimed at doing is to say, have you considered every single one of the requirements, the obligations in POPPI for this process? That's what a ROPA looks like. It basically has all the obligations, and then it allows you to know what they look like. Right? So here's just to help you to see what I'm talking about. When we do a privacy impact assessment, or when we do a risk register, we have rating scales like this. So you'll see how now we talk about reputational impact, penalties and fines, strategic impact, and we rate it from 1 to 5 usually, and we give it a color scale. Okay, and then I just use spreadsheets for my risk registers, and all we do is we just say, well, if it's got a high impact and it's also got a very high level of likelihood, so we have the same table again for likelihood, then we have a high risk, because 5 times 5 is 25, or 5 plus 5 is 10. So if there's significant risk attached to this processing, then we've got a very high risk. Or we might be looking at something that has a fairly minor impact. Now, if you think about yourself as an employee with a payroll, if the payroll goes down, the impact on you not getting your salary is pretty high. Okay, the impact on the organization is they don't actually suffer, except that they've now got unhappy employees, right? So that is a type of risk, but operations doesn't necessarily stop. So that's not a massive privacy risk, a business risk, but it has a high impact on you because your salary arrives late. Okay, so your personal perception of risk in that context is different to the organization's perception of risk. And that's what a personal information impact assessment does. It says, when you look at this impact, don't just look at operational strategic impact. Have a look at all of these things. Have we actually allowed for openness? Have we allowed for purpose? Have we justified why we're doing it? Have we allowed for participation? I'm flying through this because I've been covering this in the entire series to date. These are all of the things we've been working through. You know, does this processing, this payroll, have quality and security built in? You know, who's accountable for the payroll system? So when we do the personal information impact assessment, we're looking at it from the perspective of the data subject, and we're asking, have we adhered to the requirement for openness, yes or no? Does that make sense? Okay, so don't worry too much about this slide. I just wanted, you would have seen it before in other presentations, but just to slim it down for you. The riskiest risks, the main things you have to worry about, even if you forget everything else that I've said, 3 things you should really know about for POPPI. Okay, what are you doing with financial account numbers? Are you doing something that needs prior authorization? And are you messing around with something where somebody could complain to the regulator, like what just happened with that direct marketing thing? Okay, if you understand those are the 3 types of penalties we have in POPPI. That's it. That's literally the 3 types of penalties. There is another one where you have to ignore the information regulator, but that's not your job, right? That's the compliance officer and the information officer's job. So I've ignored that lot. But this is the one with the 10 million rand fine. This is the one with the 1 million rand fine. And this is the one with civil liability. So in other words, someone's allowed to complain and then they're allowed to sue you in a civil court case. That's it. Those are the risks. That's what you have to worry about. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this slideshow. I wanted to show you a practical, I wanted to show you a practical view of what I'm talking about so that you can get a feeling for what I mean. So we all love spreadsheets. I think everything starts making a lot more sense when you look at spreadsheets. I am aware that spreadsheets are not a great presentation format, but you're data people, so I think you can cope with it. All right. So this is to bring all those bits of terminology together. This is what I ended up doing. Okay. You have an information risk management framework, which will handle our security and our privacy risk. At the moment, mainly privacy. Okay. We have our policy, which tells us what we're going to do, a process for how we manage privacy, which is usually the compliance officer's job or the risk manager's job. We have a framework document that explains how we're going to integrate ISO and DARMA and everything into our privacy compliance. So we have a privacy compliance framework document. We then have a method for risk management. Now I'm going to show you what that method looks like. We then monitor our legislations, like what applies to us, and then we actively monitor particular legislations that present risk. We then have our risk monitoring plan, and we have our risk treatment plan, and then we have our schedule of personal information impact assessments, okay, which will happen at major strategic changes and changes in operations, which would include, by the way, IT changes. So like if you're going to be rolling out a new system, something of release management, you'd build it in there. All right, and then this framework is applying different types of standards. I should add DMBOK in there to be representative as well. Okay, this is what a charter is more or less like. It's normally a very formal document, but I like to keep things kind of in one place. So this is your privacy and security program, hopefully for 2024 and not for last year. And you kind of say, what are your outcomes? You say, what's the scope, like in terms of legislations? What are we going to worry about? And what obligations are we worrying about? So South Africa's privacy obligation compliance requirements and our security management. All right. And then what you do is you have a program of participants. So what you'll do is that this is in case you have a group where you have got different companies or you've got third parties and outsourced service providers, strategic partners, that sort of thing. But basically, you're going to have people in a role in a place who will have particular roles in your program. So you might have your privacy officer. So this would be your information officer or your DPO if you're in the UK. And they would take the lead on privacy operations. But you would need your information security guy to be a member of this as well, right? I'm going to need my payroll. So my HR manager is going to need to be a champion because I really need my HR manager to understand what's going on. And in fact, probably, actually, you know what? I really want this person to be a member of this. This is a little bit like maybe if we have data stewards, they might have to be champions of my privacy program. Okay, my HR manager might actually take the lead on my awareness training. Right, so then I combine security and privacy. I don't know how you guys manage it. Sometimes they're done as two different things. Direct marketing. Somebody's got to take ownership of direct marketing. So the privacy officer takes ownership because we talk about compliance, but obviously our marketing manager is going to play a very important role over there. So they're also going to be a member. Right? Our information security. Obviously, our CISO or our head of IT or somebody's going to take the lead on that. Our privacy champions have to be members because they need to understand security and privacy. And I need our data stewards to be informed about the security program. Okay, does that make sense? The HR member and managers outsourcing payroll, so they need to be a member of the security program so to understand the risk of having outsourced financial information. Does that make sense? If you're going into a program like AI, adopting AI, like a lot of people are now assessing Copilot and going through that readiness program, or if you're wanting to adopt some kind of ChatGPT functionality to your systems, it's a good idea to add that to your information risk program, right? Because you're going to have privacy impacts. There's now AI, a growing body of legislation around AI that builds into your compliance framework, and it all overlaps with security and privacy and everything else. Okay, so this is what it looks like. has anybody seen a charter or like seen something similar to this or seen something very different to this that you maybe want to mention or like maybe ask questions about this? The role of the charter? Any questions? Just want to make sure there's sign of life out there. Maybe should we pick on Jane? Sorry, you're at the top of the list. So, Jane, is this helpful to you at all to see this or to know that this is how you plan for privacy monitoring and privacy management?
Yes, I think it is helpful. It's what you just explained now. It sort of looked like a racy, but not actually a racy. Am I wrong?
Yeah, it is kind of like a race. It is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So you could change that to accountable like that. You could do it like that. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
You can.
Yeah.
So if you want to turn it into racy, that's absolutely brilliant. You could do that. And then, but it also goes like, so what we're also doing though is defining focus groups or center of excellence or maybe I like to do communities of practice where you've got to get people from all over the company to get together and agree how we're going to manage direct marketing. Because maybe the sales team is doing some level of direct marketing. The marketing team have their idea of what they think they're doing. We've outsourced some of the stuff to some partner. Maybe they came to you in IT and they said to you, oh, we need to send out bulk SMSs. Could you give us a bulk SMS partner? And it's a good idea to kind of pull these different things together and say, guys, we need to understand direct marketing in context of POPPI. Right, so that becomes a focus group or a community of practice. You see how that, now that would happen because we identified that direct marketing could be a risk to our organization. Does it make sense? Or because your compliance officer said, there's direct marketing obligations in POPPI, and we don't know if we are compliant. So I want a focus group to investigate, to make sure that we're compliant and to complete the privacy impact assessment. Is that terminology starting to make sense at least? Auxilia, is that kind of making sense to you? Cool, good stuff. This is what a risk method looks like, guys. So we've got our risk rating, which is we take our likelihood. There's our scale for likelihood on the left. If you've ever done IT service management or whatever, you would see something very similar in the way that you figure out the priority of an incident ticket. It's the same kind of thing. So you have your likelihood going from not applicable at 1 to almost certain to at 5. In fact, that normally means that it's already happened. And then impact being like it's really low to being extremely high. And then you decide, somebody in your organization, your risk manager, your managing director, somebody's got to decide what's orange and what's red. Okay, so someone has to agree that. That's not set in stone. That's entirely up to you. You guys get to decide which of these numbers mean high risk and which ones mean moderate risk. And then what we do is that we have, now if you're worried about, for example, data breaches, this should tell you how to escalate something. So for example, if that privacy risk, let me just zoom in there a bit so you can see it. I hope this is clear. You can see it. So if we're talking about a very high privacy risk, we've got to alert everybody and we've got to initiate our data breach protocol because it's a very high impact data breach. If it's kind of a low impact data breach, like for example, somebody internally saw somebody else's banking details, that's technically a data breach. You're not in payroll, you shouldn't see those details. The impact though, I mean, you would go to your manager and say, I saw the stuff, I'm not sharing it with anybody, I've deleted the email, done, right? You need to start asking questions around, well, we need to do a privacy impact assessment because we need to understand how it is that you came to see that personal information in the first place, all right? So we need to mitigate that risk. So we need to understand it. And the way we do it is we conduct a POPIA or a personal information impact assessment or privacy impact assessment. Pick your flavor. So that kind of gives us our escalation plan, right? And in our methodology, what we do is we don't leave stuff to chance. What we do is we say, look, we want this to be it is kind of like, it's a little bit heuristic, like you will kind of thumb suck sometimes, but on the whole, you want to know from your finance manager, are we scared of 3 million rand fines? Are we scared of 10 million rand fines? Are we scared of 10,000 rand fines? Like for some companies, a 10,000 rand fine would be a very high impact. For other companies, I've worked for a company that said to me, look, a 10 million rand fine, honestly, not a problem. We can pay that. We've got other penalties that could like literally bring down the GDP of a country, right? So we're not worried. So I'm like, okay. So, you know, their definition of a very high impact would be very different to my definition of a very high impact. Does that make sense? All right. Now, something that POPPI wants us to do is to not only look at the impact on the company, but to also look at the impact on the data subject. Okay, so this is a privacy impact assessment rating. So what we're doing here is we're saying the data subjects may encounter significant or even irreversible consequences. If I'm implementing biometric equipment, right? I'm going to do finger scanning to get into the door now, or I'm going to do face recognition for my new app that I'm developing, or I'm going to roll out face definition. A lot of people did this for COVID. I'm going to roll out face recognition, read your temperature at the door, and then let you in based on whether you've got a temperature or not. If that face recognition, that I'm going to call it a fingerprint. So basically the print, like the print of my face, that digital representation of my face. If that gets hacked, I can't change my face. Okay, like I'm now not going to be able to use face recognition anyway, and anyone with that data could impersonate me in face recognition systems. And do you see, like, banks use this? I mean, so that's a very high impact for me. If it's just my password that's been lost, I can change my password, and then I can suffer the consequence of my data getting out there. But if my face recognition gets out, you know, the digital fingerprint, there's not much I can do about that. Okay, so what this privacy impact assessment does is it says, look, if what we're doing is super risky, if it's going to, like, it's not going to cost the business a lot of money if our fingerprint door access control gets hacked. You know, we have a service provider who comes and removes those little hard disks from our ceiling. We don't know what they do with those hard disks. Do they dispose of those properly? We don't know. Okay, so for the business, that's not a big impact. For the data subject, that's a big impact. And that's why we have data privacy, data protection legislation, to get companies to look at it from a point of view of the data subject. There's a few other metrics here: the number of data subjects affected, the type of personal information, so account numbers, criminal objectionable behavior, information about children, versus HR disciplinary proceedings, SPI, which is special personal information. So if data managers have got to know what SPI is, because you need to be categorizing data correctly. And then types of processing. And there's some types of processing, for example, that require prior authorization. Now, if you're dealing with data or looking at data flows or doing a bigger business analyst, you should be very aware of this processing could require prior authorization. Therefore, I need to either change the design of the system, or I need to highlight back to management that there's an additional risk here, that the compliance information officer has got to get involved, and we need to do a privacy impact assessment before we continue. Does that help? So we're hitting on 5 o'clock, so I'm going to pretty much stop there. So Tisha, does that help you from a system delivery and software development perspective, to know that this is how we rate and rank risk?
Yes, it does a lot.
Have you seen this kind of thing before?
Yeah, we do have some sort of like a risk register where we put all our risk and the rating, whether it's high, low, and medium, and all those mitigation processes that we put in place on how to mitigate it, those risks and all that. So yeah, this is actually very familiar to me.
Good, excellent. I'm pleased to hear that, because that means that you've got a very mature compliance management function. So you would probably see something like this, where this is a compliance risk monitoring. So this is basically saying, if POPIA wants us to manage financial account numbers, this is what the law says we must do. This is the kind of our interpretation of it. What's the inherent impact is higher because there's a penalty attached. How likely is it for us? Not so much. So therefore our risk is moderate. And then you might say, okay, well, look, what's our plan to mitigate that risk, right? Our risk treatment plan, RTP. We need to secure our financial account numbers and implement policies for that, right? Has that worked? Yeah.
Yes,
Is this
but I
something
feel
that's
like
effective?
the one that you're presenting now, it's more detailed. I have not seen something like this. This one is more detailed because I think it's looking at each maybe what I can say, what function, like let's say you're looking at the whole POPIA, what it says, and if really you are complying with it. So maybe we might have it, but I've not seen it.
Well, the other view is where you list the risks, because this is a very specific thing. This is a compliance risk monitoring plan. Okay.
Yes, I
so
see.
This is saying, are we compliant with everything? The thing I wanted to show you guys though is a simplification of this, which I just realized I shut down in my haste. Not that one. Yeah, this one. So I wanted to show you, before I let you go, I just want to show you one simple way you could do it. So that's the higher grade compliance risk management. But there's a very simple way that you can also do it. So I just want to put this in your head before I leave you. So I always talk about monitoring your riskiest risks. Okay. And the thing with where are we going? I don't know. The thing though is that there's a lot there. There's a lot of detail there. So how do we start? Okay. So what you can do is that you can take the obligations, and what I've done here is I've listed them from maximum legal liability, from 10 million Rand to 1 million Rand to civil liability, right? So what we do is we say, are we sending special information across the border into another country that doesn't have privacy legislation? Okay, so yes, our payroll is sitting in some country that doesn't have privacy legislation, or isn't an adequate system. Okay, so that's an orange risk. We need to do a privacy impact assessment, and who's responsible? HR is responsible. Okay, a payroll system. Is our payroll being managed correctly? Like, do we have any risk with regards to payroll system? Well, when I look at the payroll system, what I can do is I can go down here and I can ask each of these questions about payroll, and I can say, well, do we have any, here's one, so safeguards, security safeguards. Have we satisfied our security safeguard? So then I'll say, well, security assessment needed, right? And I'll mark it as red because I haven't actually double checked that before. I don't know if our payroll system is secure. Does that make sense? If we're looking at automated decision making, we might say, listen, we don't even know. Do we do automated decision making? I don't know. I'm going to have to go speak to my systems architect to go find out. Maybe somebody in recruitment, maybe we're using some recruitment software that does automated decisions. So we need to, and if we do it, well, then we need to do a privacy impact assessment, right? So that's another way of looking at it. Like, are we processing information about children? Do we have authorization to do that? So like, we might say, well, you know, HR is dealing with our medical aids and stuff, and we give them all the information about our children. So maybe we should know more about that. So let's do a privacy impact assessment. Okay. So that's just, I just wanted to give you that simplified view. This is what I call your riskiest risks, because when you zoom out, you can see very quickly, like, oh, here's a problem one, right? This is an obligation that several parts of our business might have an issue with. Let's worry about that first. Right? So this is our security safeguards. We're like, oh, okay, guys, we need to go and double check and make sure that our security is applied specifically to payroll, specifically to HR practices, and very specifically to the way we manage IT, whatever it might be. Okay, so does that kind of, I just wanted to give you that simple view, take you back out again to a very high level, simple little tool that you could do very easily. Just make it like that. And by the way, across the top here, you could have departments, you could have teams, you could have systems, you could have business processes. Okay, anything that you think might carry some risk, and you put it across the top, and then you assess it against each of the obligations down the left. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, I hope that was helpful for everybody. It is 5:05. I'm very happy to stick around. We can stop the recording. And then if you guys would like to stick around and ask me more questions, you're very welcome. I did put up a link to a document in the, thank you. I did put up a link in the chat for a document.